knowledge management and virtual teams, although they quite nicely connect, so it's not that bad that we do the rest of the lecture, rest of the previous lecture first. If all is well, we've received all your papers, and just remember that this Thursday is the review and discussion of your draft paper. So for Thursday, there is an announcement on Blackboard. I think the announcement has just been posted like 2 minutes ago. It should have happened automatically, where you can see the schedule for this Thursday, when you're supposed to show up via Zoom. Of course, the Zoom links are also included. And I just wanted to stress that make sure that you're on time, because we have like 25 or 30 minutes per group, and usually we need that time, so that we can start it, so that we can start on time. So that's for this Thursday. And well, I want to thank you all for your participation last Thursday in the work group on Zoom. I really liked the discussions we had about the pros and cons of Zoom and the tie-in with the literature and also with practice. So I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. So, okay, let's now go to the lecture. Also, I again running behind. So last week we talked about virtual teams, and we kind of ended here. So the affordances and functions of technologies in virtual teams. And I explained that when you look at virtual teams, when you look at what virtual teams should offer to the virtual team members in order to make sure they're able to work, and this counts for like every virtual team there is. So this goes for 2 people working together as small virtual teams, and this also applies to enterprise-wide social media, and that is basically organization-wide or even organization spanning. All of these are basically teams in one way or another that use technology to communicate and work with each other. And I explained there are basically 3 main functions of these teams that technology should support. And when you look at the affordances of social media and peer-to-peer communication, they all match really nicely to these different functions of virtual team support. So, and they were, in short, functions that support information processing, that allow you to share information about work-related tasks, documents that you need to read, but it's also, writing on a shared document, sort of, to make sure that you can actually produce the reports and other things that you're supposed to deliver. You have technology that support decision-making. You can vote on each other's ideas, you can like each other's posts on most social media, and things like shared documents, shared notes, things like that. And you can see that these match nicely to the affordances of social media. So editability, persistence, associations, visibility, they all kind of offer that functionality. So Google Docs is visible to everyone with access. They can all work in the same document. It's editable. It's persistent. Many social media also offer those functionalities, which is part of visibility, by to like and comment and rank each other's ideas. But it really nicely supports the information processing needs of virtual teams. So that's one. The next one is process structuring. So as a virtual team, as a team in general, you need to plan things. So you need to coordinate the process. You need to make sure, you need to say, okay, you do this, you do that, you need to hand in this document then, etc. So things like agenda setting, coordination, making appointments, that's all part of process structure. And that, of course, can also be fulfilled by technology. So, and many enterprise social media exactly offer these functionalities to the clients. So just project management in general. And the third one is that you need to offer communication support to a virtual team. So you need to be able to make sure that teams can communicate. They can chat, they have discussion board, they can email, they can use video conferencing, whatever. And you can support that by again, by visibility, but also by video conferencing or by adopting a chat functionality. And all these are classified in terms of reduced queues, in terms of social presence, and therefore they may affect the interaction as well. So characteristics of computer-mediated communication, in this case specifically, affect the extent to which you can support communication in a virtual team. So if you think about what should a virtual team do, they should be able to do well information processing, process structuring, communication support. And then you can think of, okay, how can we make sure they can do this by using certain social media technologies and computer-mediated communication technologies. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was shared understanding. And it looks like a completely new topic, but it's basically the same as this. So what is shared understanding? Well, shared understanding is that you develop as a team, you need to develop a shared understanding. It's also called mental model, team awareness, convergence. But it basically boils down to that you, as a virtual team, need to know what the task is and what everyone can contribute to the task. And you need to be able to work together in a cooperative fashion. So in scientific terms, that means shared understanding is, one, developing a common understanding of the task and each other's viewpoints, so what everyone can contribute to the task and what everyone thinks of the task. And you need to understand each other, so you need to build trust, you need to like each other, and you need to understand each other's viewpoints through something which is called convergence. So basically that means, in layman's terms, a shared understanding is knowing what the task is and who does what, and liking each other and trusting each other so that you're able to work together. And you need both, because else a virtual team fails. So if you know the task but you don't like each other, the virtual team will fail. If you like each other but don't really know what you should do, it also fails. And these two things, understanding of the task, that's basically the same as information processing and process structuring. So understanding the task and what everyone should do is being able to communicate what the task is about, being able to share documents, and being able to plan what everyone should do. But then you should also be able to discuss socially, to discuss what everyone is working on, to discuss when you disagree with each other. So you need to communicate. So you need to reach understanding of the task, and you need to know when it's complete. You need to be satisfied. And in order to do that, you need communication support. So you need social presence, so that you can see, I'm working with those people, I like them. Or you need a social identity, I'm working with people from my organization, or I work with people who all wear a blue shirt, or whatever. So you need, what we discussed last week, you need a social identity in order to like each other. And you need to understand what everyone knows, who everyone is. And that's what communication support offers. So communication support offers a social presence, that offers a shared understanding, that offers the ability to communicate, and that offers you to communicate about each other and about what everyone's working on. So I think this is mostly clear. So if you read the virtual team literature, and if you read what a virtual team should do, shared understanding is like the central component. But shared understanding is very difficult to define. And I think one of the easiest ways to define it is in terms of, understanding the task through information processing and process structuring. That part, by the way, is called conveyance. And understanding each other's viewpoints and understanding each other, building trust through convergence, which is supported by communication support. And that is shared understanding. And if you read basically any paper about virtual teams, if you read practical cases about how social media can support virtual teams, it all boils down to, okay, you have to make sure that people like each other and that they know who everyone is, and you have to make sure that they are able to work on the task. And every social media application in organizations is there to support those two processes by means of offering information processing, process structure, and communication support. So if you look at the papers in the literature for the course for last week, you will see that they often call it differently, but it basically boils down to those two aspects, to information processing and process structuring, thus conveyance, information about the task, and supporting the social process. So in the paper of Malhotra and Matschak, they define virtual team performance in terms of two things that you need to accomplish. So they say, well, okay, you need to be able to support task knowledge awareness, which is the ability for people to know what everyone is working on, and should be able to support presence awareness. And then they combine that with an interaction effect that for presence awareness works best when you cross knowledge boundaries, and task knowledge awareness works best with non-routine tasks. But to be honest, that's less interesting than a general idea that you need both to support task knowledge awareness and you need to support presence awareness. And if you look specifically in how they define those terms and how they measure those in their paper, in their study, you see that the task awareness scale, they simply ask people, do you use IT or social media to contribute to knowledge in the team, to keep track of changes in work, to link and compare knowledge to each other, which is basically the same as information processing and process structuring. Keep track of changes is process structuring, contribute knowledge to team, link and compare knowledge is information processing. If you look at how they measure presence awareness, it relates to communication support. So they say, does the technology allows you to feel present with others? Does it allow flexible and synchronous communication? And that's really the same as communication support. So in short, they are basically argue that those two components affect performance, and those two components together are basically similar to achieving shared understanding. So in the other paper as well, they also talk about communication and shared identification. And it turns out that being able to communicate about the task, which if you look at how do they measure that, that affects relationship quality and then probably ultimately team performance. And you need shared identification so that people actually like each other and have the idea that they work on the same task. So the whole social process that also relates to relationship quality and then performance in the end. And I think this paper is interesting because they also focus on, again, those two aspects. So offering what they call communication is mostly information processing. Shared identification is mostly communication support. That leads to perceived proximity. And if you look at how they measure that, that's basically shared understanding. So perceived proximity in their measure is understanding who everyone is, feeling that you're together, and being able to work on the task. And finally, what I think most interesting, and it's also interesting, is that objective distance doesn't really play a role at all in the performance of a virtual team. So it's not about how far is everyone apart, but it's really about how far does everyone feel apart in a virtual team. And can you solve that by offering those opportunities to process information, to communicate, etc. And that is far more important than objective distance. Specifically, there is another study. It's not in the course literature, but I think it's pretty fun to show. It's already a bit old. But this is a study in which they investigated, I think, a couple of, maybe close to 100 virtual teams. And they measured the effectiveness and the efficiency of those virtual teams, mostly in terms of subjective characteristics, but also objective characteristics. And then they classified the effectiveness and efficiency in terms of, okay, how far are those teams apart actually? And it turned out that, well, if you see, if teams are on the same floor, then they're able to communicate, to work together pretty well, because then they're really close, people know each other, they can just drop by each other's office, so that kind of works. If people are in the same building, but not on the same floor, then you see that efficiency drops, and also at the same site, so maybe different buildings. That doesn't really work, because then people are fairly close, but still, because they think, okay, why are we communicating at a distance? Is that because we don't like each other? Then people are kind of annoyed that they communicate as a virtual team, while it would be just as easy to go face to face. But you see that for every other constellation, for most other constellations of virtual teams, it doesn't really matter. You see that if they're in the same city, same country, same continent, so they don't communicate at all face to face, they're still able to function at basically the same level, or maybe a bit more than face to face teams. It only becomes a problem as a virtual team to be able to work together if you're on different continents, because then issues like cultural differences, time zone differences, because then all those issues that complicate a virtual team come into play. And of course, this does not go for every virtual team, and the technology and the people in the team and the organization the team is located in play a huge role in the effectiveness. But again, this shows that really objective distance of a virtual team isn't really that important. It's more about the creating the shared understanding that affects team performance. So before we switch to knowledge management, I want to give one example of a study that we did in which we looked at how 3D environments could support virtual team interactions. And it's been a while since we've done the study, so we've done it in Second Life. Of course, you have other virtual 3D platforms right now, but we chose Second Life. So I think it's a fun study to see that the 3D environment can have some effect, but mostly because this also shows the importance of creating a shared understanding. So we did a bunch of studies, but I will point out only one. So if you look at what virtual environments can offer, it's mainly boils down to two concrete things. So if you are in a virtual environment, so if you play, let's say, Among Us, as probably everyone is playing currently, then you see that there are two major characteristics of the 3D environment. One, there's a 3D, not really Among Us, but there's a 3D environment. Two, you are represented by an avatar. And those are two important characteristics of 3D virtual environments. So avatar-based interaction, so you are an avatar, you interact with other avatars, and you are in a shared space. And that's what we wanted to investigate. So we thought, okay, if you look at the shared space, So the shared space offers a degree of realism. So you are in the shared space. If the task that you need to accomplish is related to the space that you're in, maybe that allows you to get a better impression of the task that you're supposed to be doing. Maybe you can interact to a certain extent with the 3D environment, so you can walk through it, for example. And it provides an immersive experience. So, and immersion means that you feel like you're in the virtual environment. And it gives you a feeling of being there. And we thought, well, that may relate to the whole information processing part. So we left out process structuring in this study. So we focused only on information processing and communication support. So we thought, well, that may affect information processing. So maybe if the virtual environment is real, if you can walk through the environment and feel part of the environment, maybe it's easier to get an idea of the environment you're in, and that may help you in accomplishing the task. On the other hand, you have avatar-based interaction. So in this case, we did an experiment in which people were in teams of 3, and as a team of 3, they had to make a decision. And everyone was represented by an avatar. And we thought that may result in increased presence. So because you are in the environment with the other avatars, that gives a degree of presence that you don't have, for example, in chat-based interaction. But it also gives a degree of identification and similarity, because the avatars they are not lifelike, they're not really you, so they are an avatar, and they all kind of looked alike, so similar clothes, kind of similar, they were male and female, of course, but similar appearance. So we thought maybe people also can identify a bit better with their group because their avatars are similar. And we thought if people feel present, and if they kind of feel similar to each other, think the side theory we discussed last week, then maybe people are able to communicate a bit better because people trust each other, they like each other, they identify with each other. And then finally, those two processes, the ability to process information because being in a virtual environment, and communication support because the identification and presence makes it easier to communicate, that may help group decision making. And we use the distinction between information processing, process structuring, and communication support for that. But we also use media synchronicity theory, and media synchronicity theory is derived from that theory. And media synchronicity theory argues, okay, you have, but they focus mostly on information processing and communication support. So they say you have to convey information about the task, which is information processing, and you have to reach an understanding through communication, which they call convergence. And together, that results in group decision making. So we tested that, and we did a bunch of studies, but I will point out only the first one. So in the first study, we had people discussing a task which was a spatial planning task. So they had to make a decision about an existing neighborhood in the Netherlands and what would happen with an empty space in our neighborhood. So what kind of building would be built there. And in one condition, they were shown a movie of the neighborhood with the plans, and they could only chat with each other. In a second condition, they were represented as an avatar, so they were in a 3D environment, but they were in a shared office space, which is represented here. So they were in a shared working space, and they saw a movie. So they saw this movie at the top right here, presented on the wall. And in the third condition, they were actually in the environment. So they saw the neighborhood the building would be located in. They could not see the actual building, so they just see the environment. But they were really immersed in the environment. So then we thought, okay, what would happen? So we focus on immersion and social presence. So we thought, okay, this one, bottom right, causes immersion, feeling immersed in the environment, and being represented by an avatar causes you to feel more present. And that, in turn, relates to shared understanding. Well, basically what we found was you never exactly find what you hope to find, but we mostly find that both immersion and social presence to an extent worked, but the shared environment, so the neighborhood did not matter. Only the fact that people felt like they were in the same room helped them feeling more immersed and in turn also a bit more present. And that helped them to reach a shared understanding. And that in turn resulted in better decisions, well, at least more better decisions in terms of consensus, process satisfaction, cohesion of the team, etc. So it's not a full test of the model, but we indeed showed that both immersion and social presence, both were needed to reach shared understanding. And that shared understanding was really important for the team to reach a decision. And of course, the fun thing that I thought was that you didn't really need the whole neighborhood, but only simply the fact that you were with other people, with other avatars in the same room, caused kind of a feeling of, we're in here together, we must make sure that we make a good decision. So I thought it was pretty interesting. So it's not a full test of the model, but it kind of shows that issues related to computer-mediated communication and social media, like presence and immersion, are related to team performance. So I have other examples as well about 3D environments and the environments we used for decision making, but I think it's best if we switch to knowledge management now. So in short, I want to point out the conclusion of the virtual teams part, which we take with us in the next slides, is that there are 3 functions of technology in virtual teams: information processing, process structure, and communication support. When technology is able to support these functions, people will reach a shared understanding, which is a very good thing for team performance. And if you look at social media affordances, they can really affect the creation of these shared understanding. So social media is really useful to affect information processing and process structuring. It's very easy to share information. It's very easy to vote and like and rank things via social media. And computer-mediated communication, so social presence, reduced nonverbal cues, etc., they really affect communication in a team. So they really affect the extent to which people feel like they're in the same team, to which people trust each other, etc. But however, of course, this really interacts with a lot of other characteristics of the organization and the task. If people are used to working with each other in the virtual teams, of course, it's easier. If the task is very simple, then you don't need all those difficult technologies to support information processing. So it depends, of course, on the context. But remembering those 3 functions of a virtual team, those functions of technology in the virtual teams, remembering that you need those 3 in order to be effective, and then figuring out, okay, how can we use social media in such a way that we can support all of them? That, I think, is a really useful tool when you will be really working on implementing social media in your organization. Okay, let's get to knowledge management. And of course, knowledge management is exactly the same as virtual. no, not the same as virtual teams, but really relates to virtual teams, because knowledge management is also something that you have to do in the virtual teams. You have to make sure that people know what they're supposed to do, that they have all information they need to do the tasks, to complete the tasks successfully. Only knowledge management that you can also see in a wider context. So for example, in innovation in an organization, you want people to be able to share knowledge also outside of their virtual team, so that people are, offering their help to others, that people answer questions that are asked on the social media platform in an organization. So just a feeling that, just people that are willing to help each other, that are willing to help on each other's projects, and the ability to, to ask questions and provide solutions across the organization as a whole. So that's basically knowledge management. So I want to say something about knowledge management. I want to explain something about social media, of course, and knowledge management. So why is knowledge management so hard in virtual teams, and can we use social media to solve this? I'm going to connect that to, again, virtual teams, but in terms of COPs and NOPs. I'll explain shortly what those are. And then I will explain some solutions to challenges of knowledge management, technical solutions, but also social solutions to knowledge management issues. But before we can do all that, of course, I need to explain something about knowledge management. So knowledge is, basically handling information and turning information into knowledge is the key thing for many organizations. So if you look at the complete service sector, it basically all involves around knowledge. What I do in my work, what you are doing as a student, is all revolves around information and knowledge as the most important production factor. The only thing I do in my work is collect information from various sources, integrating that, and then communicating that to others. That's all that I do. And that's the case for many people. If you work in marketing, if you work in software development, if you work in media, if you work in a non-knowledge sector, but if you work as a consultant, if you work as a marketer, as a manager, information is the thing you have. So knowledge is information combined with other information and with your own experience is the most important production factor. And it is what makes organizations competitive in terms compared to other organizations. So most valued companies in the world, Apple, Google, Amazon, are mostly knowledge-based organizations. So knowledge very important, period. But knowledge also very difficult, period. Because if you look at the current economy and how people, so if you look at how people have to work now, people have to work from home. They have to communicate with each other from home. But also even before Corona, organizations became much more flexible. So organizations are global. People have to work with each other from different continents in different virtual teams. They're part of different virtual teams. It becomes more and more important to just process information to keep ahead of the competitors. So knowledge management is difficult because all these factors that you see on screen now, which if you remember, we discussed in the first and second lecture, they are all factors that we see happening in today's economy, and they all revolve around knowledge management. So then what is knowledge management? Well, knowledge management is about being able to share and create and store knowledge. And knowledge consists of two parts. So knowledge consists of explicit knowledge. And that's knowledge that can be codified. That's knowledge in books, on Wikipedia, in databases, in instruction manuals, on corporate intranets. That's explicit knowledge. That's knowledge that can be codified, stored, and is easily transmitted. So simply said, if you can put it in a database or manual, it is explicit knowledge. But you also have tacit or implicit knowledge. Tacit is zwijgend in Dutch, silent in English. And that's knowledge that is very difficult to put into writing. So that those are just the things that you know to be able to work together. It's things like, but you as a student, you know which teachers are lenient and which are not. So you just know that, oh, I can hand in an assignment too late with this teacher because he or she is relaxed, but I should always be on time with this teacher because he or she is very strict. That's implicit knowledge. It's stored nowhere, but everyone just knows because you just hear it from somewhere. So that's knowledge is based on experience, on collaboration, on commitment to the task and being able to work together. It's made up of values, of mental models, of perceptions, or just general ideas. And those things are difficult to store because they're based on questions that you don't ask until you need them. And they're based on answers that you cannot give until you're asked. So it's not something. So you cannot ask me, but Alex, could you please write down all your tacit knowledge about our department? I can't because I don't know what the questions are and I don't know what I know. So it only becomes relevant in doing, so in communication. So you cannot store this information. And I think you know where I'm heading to. So if you look at social media, then social media is especially suitable for tacit knowledge. So social media can especially support tacit knowledge. And if you look at like basically all implementations of social media in organizations, it's enabling the organization to be able to make sure that people can share tacit knowledge and to make that and to try to make the tacit knowledge explicit. Because, say, to provide the example of, okay, which teachers are more lenient and which teachers are more strict, that's something that is difficult to write a manual about, but it is something you can easily ask in a Facebook or WhatsApp group. And once you have asked that in a Facebook or WhatsApp group, other people can also read that. You can search that. So I can just search in the WhatsApp group, strict teacher, lenient teacher, whatever. So social media, because social media is visible, because it connects people, because it's editable, and most of all, because it's persistent, allows you to make that tacit knowledge more explicit. And this is one of the most important reasons that organizations incorporate enterprise social media, to try to make tacit knowledge explicit knowledge. And as you see, it really connects social media. Really, the force of social media connects really nice to implicit knowledge. We'll talk a bit more about that later. But first I want to explain a bit more before we head into the technology part and how social media can exactly support that. I want to explain a bit more about why social media is difficult. Social media is difficult. Why knowledge management in organizations is something that is challenging. So if you look at explicit and implicit knowledge, if you look at the tasks that you want your people in an organization to do to be able to work together, it starts out really easy. So if you are a virtual team in an organization, you need to share task-related information, you need to plan, the information process, the process structuring. It's green. because it's fairly easy. So these are the things that are easy to support and that are easy to communicate. You do this, you do that, and it must be finished within a couple of weeks. A bit more challenging is making implicit knowledge explicit. So, okay, we now have a basic idea of what we are supposed to be doing, but who can do what? So who knows what? Who has which expertise? Is there someone else in the organization who can help us with that? So making implicit knowledge explicit, who knows what? That's already a bit more difficult because up front you don't know who knows what oftentimes. But then you have to manage that implicit knowledge. You have to make sure that people can understand each other, that they speak the same language, not only in terms of national language, but in terms of the specific jargon that they use. So you have to make sure that people create shared understanding, shared mental models, and shared beliefs, so that they are able and willing to share information. Well, that's even more difficult. And then finally, the thing you want to achieve continues that. You want to manage the social process. You want to make sure that people are willing to share knowledge. So for example, in an organization where people get bonuses based on their individual performance, it's highly unlikely that people are freely willing to share what they know to their colleagues in the organization. Because it's bonus based, their colleagues are actually their competitors, so why should they share? But even in organizations without such a structure, it's very difficult. People dislike each other, people don't know each other, people don't trust each other. So how do you manage the whole social part so that people are willing to communicate with each other? And you see, in order for successful knowledge management, for successful virtual teams, you need to do all of this. But it gets gradually more difficult. So sharing explicit information, easy peasy. Managing the social process, very difficult. Especially, so there's a kind of a paradox, because you want to manage this as an organization. So as a manager in an organization, you want to make sure that people like each other, that they share information, that they create shared understanding if they work on a task. But these are exactly the things that are very difficult to manage. Because you cannot just tell people you need to like each other. That doesn't work. So you want to manage it, but you have to manage it in such a way that people still are doing it themselves. So it's very difficult. So you have to set the surroundings and you have to make sure that everything is in place for people being able to do that, but you cannot really manage it. So knowledge management in modern organizations is pretty difficult to accomplish. So you want to manage it, but managing implicit knowledge is kind of contradictory in a sense, because it is almost impossible to manage top down. So moreover, also knowledge sharing is, so if you look at, this is a specific example, if you look at innovation in an organization, you often see that in these first stages, ideas break down because people are just not willing to, to brainstorm on a problem because they don't trust each other. They're unable to reach consensus to come up with a good plan. So knowledge management, you see that it often failed even in the first phases of the whole innovation process in the organization. Not that relevant for the exam or for the course. Finally, knowledge management is challenging because the whole idea of an organization changes. If we go all the way back to the first lecture, I explained there that if you look at how more and more organizations function, they function more as networks of individuals instead of networks of teams. The network individualism. So people are more person to person. They work maybe as a freelancer for different organizations, or even if they work in a specific organization, they work in many different projects. So the whole structure of an organization becomes more individualized and less boxed and localized. And of course, if it becomes more individualized, is if it revolves around weak ties, if it revolves around specialized roles, about person-to-person communication instead of group communication, then it's way more difficult to manage knowledge, because then you don't have the social process going on, because people feel more individuals than part of a team or part of the organization. So like we learned in Joost's lecture, it may be more difficult to reach commitment and identification in organizations which are more network-based. So basically all these things, so knowledge management is difficult on its own, so it's basically a paradox to manage knowledge. When you look at modern organizations, they are more individualized than before. It makes it pretty hard to make sure that people share information and are willing to work together. These issues that you see here on screen are relevant for virtual teams that we talked about in the previous lecture and just now. So these are relevant for teams consisting of a small number of people. But they are also relevant for other types of virtual teams in organizations. So there are other types of virtual teams in organizations than simple virtual teams. And they are called communities of practice and networks of practice. And I want to explain them shortly because they're quite common in modern organizations. So first of all, a community of practice is, this is the official definition, but you can basically see a community of practice as a large virtual team. So it's a group of people that work together on a common task, independent from geographical or temporal boundaries, supported by information and communication technology. So a community of practice are people who work on the same task, partly or all the way as a virtual team. So they're not constrained by a physical location, they're not constrained by a physical time, they work on a task separately, they may have different compositions, but they're always mediated by technology, and they work on the same task. So think of people developing a new airplane. That's a community of practice. So it's a huge team, so it consists of hundreds of people, maybe from different organizations, but they all work on the same task. Well, everyone has its subtasks, so they work on it separately, but they have a common task to accomplish. So that's a community of practice, basically a large virtual team. Sorry, I had to show this slide. Because this is a better, so it's a large virtual team, and it relates to what I said before. So they're working on a shared task, which is called a shared practice. So they have a shared goal, developing the airplane. What I will explain in a minute is that you usually see that those people know each other. That in a community of practice, the people who are in the larger virtual teams, they know each other, or they at least know what everyone contributes. So even if I'm in a large virtual team who develops an airplane, I may not know everyone, but I know that these people are developing the engine, so I know what they do. So even if I don't know everyone individually, still I know what everyone does, and that's what interpersonal ties means. And in smaller virtual teams and community of practice, you see that people actually know each other. So you have strong individual ties. I will explain what bond over identity means in a minute. So community of practice can be seen as a larger virtual team who work together on a shared practice, which is a shared or common goal. A network of practice, on the other hand, is something that you see more often in organizations and that you also see in more wider communities. So a network of practice is a group of people who are kind of similar to a community of practice, the major difference being that they don't have a common goal, but they have a common understanding. They have a shared thing they do. So think of a Reddit community, or think of a website where programmers in a certain programming language can ask each other questions. Those communities they're not people who work on the same task. So they do not work for a single company who actually makes an airplane, but they all do the same line of work, but they can even be competitors. So they have a shared interest. And you see this a lot. So you see this within organizations, for example, like many enterprise social media applications offer a kind of larger communities, people who are all interested in a certain technology, people who are all interested in finance, and so people from across the organization can participate there. But outside of the organization, you often encounter this in Reddit communities. Yeah, the network of, absolutely, very good. Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah, so the Wasco and Varai paper, they investigated a community of legal advisors. So it was people from all around the US who work for different companies who use the platform to just ask questions about legal issues. And we as scientists, so we have forums like ResearchGate in which you can ask questions about, for example, statistics. I sometimes go on specific sites for Python in which programmers help me with programming issues. I am a member of certain Reddit communities where people help me or may help me with certain issues about a game or something like that. So those are all networks of practice. But it's exactly the Wasco and Varai paper, and they're pretty interesting because those people have weak interpersonal ties, so they don't know each other oftentimes, but they still feel connected. They're still very willing to help each other. And according to many theories, more economic theories about why people work together, this should not work. People should not help each other if they get nothing in return. But you see that those people, they identify with each other, they feel part of the same community, and they are willing to help each other, and they are willing to share knowledge. And this idea, this was known, of course, for a long time on the internet. So even since the 80s in news groups, you would observe this. And this is something that organizations would really like to mirror. So they would really like to implement, so like those networks of practice, those shared communities in which everyone from across the organization is willing to help each other out, even if they get nothing on return and even if they don't know each other. So this is like the holy grail for many organizations to try to achieve with social media. And how we can do that, we'll discuss in a couple of minutes, because I suggest we have like a short break, like 5 minutes, and then get something to drink, and then we continue at 12 o'clock. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. So I'm back. So let's continue. So before the very short break, we talked about the challenges of social media, and we talked about actually that you not only want to challenges of knowledge management. Sorry, we talked about that you not only want to stimulate like knowledge sharing within the virtual team, but you also want to stimulate knowledge, outside the virtual team, so in those networks of practice. So it's pretty interesting to look at studies that have been done that specifically look into networks of communities of practice. And I want to do that as well. But first, let's see what kind of technology and social media solutions that are to knowledge sharing. Oh, sorry, I have to close the door. So in the first paper for today, it's not a very good paper, but it's a very recent paper that took the affordances of social media by Prima Leonardi and connected them to, okay, how do they allow employees to acquire and provide knowledge, and how does that affect creative performance, as they call it. And they developed, and they found that indeed, if people perceive that social media in the organization allows them to connect to other people, allows them to be more visible, etc. If the people have the perception that social media offers that, they are really able to acquire and provide knowledge, to get and share knowledge, and that really affects their performance. So not every relationship is that strong, and it's not. What's most interesting here is not to strengthen the relationship, but more that it shows that indeed, if people think that social media provides them support in their work, they're also able and more willing to communicate with each other in work situations. So you see how this is measured. So they ask from social media allowed me to connect with other members of the organization, allow me to watch other people's answers, so see who have liked each other's messages, content, allows me to find information. Social media allows me to edit information and to edit a document or work on a document collaboratively, and that result that I can share knowledge, that results in my personal performance. But I think it's pretty interesting if you look at this, so how they operationalized the 4 affordances of social media, it really kind of mirrors to information processing and process support. So I can connect to other members to share knowledge. I can see who has questions. I can see which questions are already answered. I can work together on a shared document, kind of all related to information processing. So you see that social media, so that the affordances of social media indeed affect knowledge sharing. And that again relates to what I explained before, the functions of technology in virtual teams. So in terms of time, I'm not going to show the video that I wanted to also to show last week, but if you look at, so you can click on Slack and you can click on Clarison, and there you see the features that both Clarison and Slack offer, both enterprise social media tools and project management tools. And you see that everything, well, most of it, what they offer, really is structured around information processing, around process structuring, and around communication support. So companies who develop enterprise social media, they also know that this paper by Siebdrat and Buckland exists, and they use the 3 distinctions that Siebdrat and Buckland make in order to explain why their platform is very useful to share knowledge. So some further examples are, if you look at what Shell does with social media, Shell has a huge Wikipedia and internal wiki system, and they use it basically for everything. So Shell, of course, is a global conglomerate, and they have people working across the globe, often in very distinct locations. You know, so some people in Nigeria working on an oil drilling rig, people working in the Arctic Sea drilling for oil. But these are all people who run into the same issues. So Shell really stimulates developing their corporate wiki. So if someone develops an issue or finds a solution of, okay, how can I connect this pipe to this pipe? They are really encouraged to share that in their corporate wiki. And as a result, other people can search for it and can search the solution to those issues. So they're building like they're building a corporate encyclopedia of all the issues they encounter. And they even kind of, so they really stimulate people in doing that. So when people start working at Shell, they get training with the, in which they use the corporate wiki. They are actively motivated to contribute to the wiki. So Shell's use of social media, so this use of social media for Shell is really an example of providing information support, just trying to get as much information as possible into the corporate wiki. IBM, let's see if this works. Hello. Right, crashing. And so this is an example of how IBM uses Slack. So Slack being enterprise social media tool throughout the development lifecycle. And if you read this, they say, so of course it's about the development lifecycle, and they, at least in this case, mostly use Slack not to communicate information, but mainly as a way to structure the process, thus to make sure that source code goes all the way through product deployment. And Slack is integrated in all the key milestones in that process. And if you read through this, they really use Slack, so they really use the affordances of visibility, of editability. They really use that to offer project management. So they use social media for process structuring. Finally, another case by BASF, a German chemical company. They have incorporated enterprise social media specifically for communication support. So somehow my images are gone. But this is an article about how BASF has used social media. I don't remember which one, but they used a social media platform mostly to stimulate communication. So they say we have approximately 110,000 employees, and we want to build up in an internal network, share knowledge, and collaborate more efficiently across units. So they specifically want to set up social media in such a way that they allow people to communicate across organizational departments. So they want to set up a network of practice, and they focus specifically with the use of social media on offering communication support. So all these examples, I think, show that you can use all the that social media is very suited to supporting those three functions of technology in a virtual team: information processing, process structure, and communication support, and that they all can really contribute to an organization being able to share knowledge, concentrate, to work together more efficiently. Finally, of course, this is just more of a side note. It's interesting to keep track of the developments that we currently have. So what happens if you look beyond social media? And maybe in a few years, this course will be called augmented reality at work or something like that. Because if you see what organizations are working on, they try to enhance all these processes even more. So, for example, expert systems are those algorithms that make decisions for you. You know, that can write papers, that can write news articles based on the software only. Um, um, Augmented reality, virtual reality can be used to share information. You know, like the studies that I just showed about the neighborhood task. You see that scientists are working on supporting the process structuring, for example, by stimulating creativity, so by augmenting your senses in order to be able to focus more, or to be able to pay more attention to what someone is saying. And you see that companies are using augmented reality and virtual realities to support communication, to support the social process. So, for example, I think a couple of teams used a paper in the work group of last Thursday, where they gave avatar-based interaction as a solution to the disadvantages of Zoom. So I think it was the Wiederholt paper that said from, okay, maybe we can use avatar-based interactions in virtual reality. Maybe we can use that to support communication that may have advantages on top of Zoom, top of video conferencing. So you see that people are working with that too. And then I think in one or two workshops we had a discussion, okay, but what do you want to do then? How do you want to, for example, do you want people's avatars to look like? And then I said, well, maybe you want them to all look alike, because if they look alike, then maybe people identify with each other. They feel part of Team Blue or Team Purple or Team Avatar, Avatar Hippo or whatever. So you can use that virtual reality to support this social process in a virtual team as well. And I have a bunch of examples that I'm not going to discuss right now, maybe for another time, because in the last part of the lecture, I want to explain to you how you can not use technology, but how you can use social media and computer-mediated communication in order to support the whole social process in a virtual team and in a network of practice. And there we come to the Wasco and Varai paper, indeed. Because it's very easy to talk about technology. So it's easy to talk about, okay, we need to have this in place, and then people can share knowledge with each other. Okay, we need to have this tool, and then people are able to ask questions to each other. But that only is successful if you're also able to stimulate the social process. So if you are able to make people willing to work together, because you can have all the technology in place that you want, but if people don't like each other or don't know each other, they won't share information. And that's what you see with many social media implementations in organizations. You often see that they just implement a social media. So they think that once we have the technology in place, it will work. But that never happens. You know, it's always a function of the technology and the way you structure the technology. And that's why, for example, Yammer, so we used Yammer in our organization. I think many people don't even know, but we had Yammer in our organization. But no one used it because they just implemented the technology and there was no use case. So there was no reason for us using it. I don't identify at all with the rest of the university. I mostly identify with my fellow communication scientists. So there was no social capital for me and for many other people. So it just kind of petered out, and now no one uses Yammer anymore in our organization. So in order to make sure that the technology is actually used, you have to make sure that the social process is in order. And you can do that by stimulating social capital. And social capital is the benefits you derive from your social network. So social capital is the money you have, the land you own, but the social capital is the people you know and what can you get from those people. So for example, I am feeling quite down right now. Who can I turn to in order to vent my heart and in order to talk with them about it? Or who in my network can I turn to if I want to have a new apartment? Or if I want to go to for holiday advice, something like that. So that's social capital. So the benefits you derive from your social network. And your social network consists of strong ties. So those are the people you know well, your friends, your family. And your social network consists of a large, of many weak ties. And weak ties are your acquaintances, or people you know, but are not friends with. Say 95% of your Facebook friends and Instagram contacts are weak ties. And also basically 95% of people you know are weak ties. And there are 3 forms of social capital. So in order to get something from your network, first of all, you need to know people. So if you don't know anyone, you cannot tap into your social capital because then you're alone. So you need to know people. You need to like those people, and those people need to like you. So you need to create a bond. That's relational social capital. And you need to be able to, you need to be at the same level of those people, as those people. So you need to speak the same language, you need to have the same base, you need to have kind of the same expertise, because else you just won't understand each other. And that's cognitive social capital. So structural capital, people you know. Relational social capital, you like those people, they like you back. Cognitive social capital, they need to be able to understand you, and you need to be able to understand them. And Basco and Farai, in their paper, they were one of the first to investigate individual motivations to share knowledge, but also these 3 forms of social capital and how those affected knowledge contribution. So they said, well, you have individual motivations for helping, so because it ups your reputation and because you just enjoy helping. But social capital will also affect if people are willing to share knowledge. And this was sharing knowledge in a network of practice, like Bas said. So it was sharing knowledge in a large community of legal advisors who didn't know each other. So a large online community. And Masco and Farai said, okay, we measure structural capital with the centrality measure, how many people you know. We measure cognitive capital with expertise and your tenure in the field, so how long you're part of the field. And relational capital with commitment and reciprocity. And then they come up with a bunch of findings, but I must say that in this case, the way that they measured it and the specific results are not the good thing about this paper. So the good thing about this paper is that they were basically the first to tie the theory of social capital to online communication and knowledge sharing networks of practice. And their paper has spurred dozens, hundreds of other studies about how social capital can affect knowledge sharing and communication in organizations. And all those other papers, they measure social capital in different ways. And they measure structural, cognitive, and relational capital in different ways, and they do find significant results. So the important thing of this paper is to remember that those 3 parts of social capital, structural, cognitive, and relational social capital, are all 3 very important things to stimulate in order to convince people to start communicating with each other and start sharing knowledge. And if you look at social media, then you again see that the affordances of social media are really well connected to these forms of social capital. So associations is basically the definition of structural social capital. So the ability to connect to other people is what structural social capital is. but also relational social capital, by being able to see each other, by knowing who is who in an organization. You can stimulate relational social capital. Cognitive social capital is also stimulated by things like adaptability. So if you don't understand someone, you can just ask a question. So you can reply to someone's discussion in the forum, for example. And of course, persistence is surrounding this. So the whole fact that this is always available online, and you can search questions and ask questions at any time, really also stimulates knowledge sharing. So you can immediately see that there are a lot of connections between the affordances of social media and stimulating social capital. So I think therefore social capital is really important, an important thing to take into account, because it's really an important factor in getting people so far to be able to work together, and also is something that you can think about on how social media may stimulate this. Okay. Then finally, I want to ask, no, I'm not going to discuss this, I'm sorry. Because this basically relates to social capital as well. I think it's better to skip this for now. I'm not going to ask anything in the exam about this. I think for now it's most important to tell something about common bond and common identity, because what we discussed before most really relates to that people know each other, so that I know him or her, I can ask him or her a question. But we've actually seen in many other lectures that stimulating an identity, making people feel as if they're part of the same team, or if they're part of the same organization, is actually also very important, and also a very important stimulant for knowledge sharing. And the last two papers for this in this week's literature discuss that. So they investigate two types of virtual teams, two types of actual networks of practice, and they investigate if which one or both is effective in stimulating knowledge sharing and working together. And those papers, they distinguish between teams that are based on a common bond and a common identity. And a common bond is that you know each other and like each other. So think about the group you're working in doing the assignment for this course. It's a group of 4 or 5 people. You all know each other, you know each other's name, you all like each other at least to a certain extent, or at least you trust each other a bit that you all do your work. So it's really a group mostly with a common bond. Also think of people you work together with in the work you do, think of your friends. It's mostly common bond. So you have an interpersonal bond because you feel attachment to all individual people in the group. You know each other, you can tell each other stories, so you can self-disclose. You have interpersonal similarity, so you feel similar because you know that they are actually similar to you, they are all basically the same age, etc. You make interpersonal comparisons, he is good at this, she is good at that. And you basically know each other, you're familiar with the team members. So that's one way of attachment to a team. But there's another way in which you can feel attached to a team, and that's common identity. And that's that you will feel part of a team because you share a common identity. That's what side model argues. So you feel attached because you feel part of that group, because you feel part of group blue. You feel part of students from our department. And that means you don't even have to know each other. You can, but not necessarily, in order to feel a team. Because in this case, you feel a team because you identify as a group. So you have group categorization. You have information about the group and why your group is cool. you feel similar to each other because you feel part of the same group. And you feel similar to each other and you feel cool and you feel part of a group because there is often intergroup competition. So we're group blue, we're better than group red. So your familiarity and the liking you have for each other is based on group membership. So for example, if you look at, I'm not going to discuss all of them, but Facebook is really bond-based. So the friends on Facebook are people you know. But maybe Amstel beer and Apple are more bond-based. So you don't know everyone who drinks Amstel, you don't know everyone who has an Apple computer, but you kind of feel part of the Apple community. So that's bond-based. So World of Warcraft may be both. You can identify with World of Warcraft and still in your party identify based on a common bond. So you know each other and you know what everyone is good at. Someone is a barbarian, someone is a wizard. And Wikipedia is also identity-based. So you have no clue who works on Wikipedia, but if you contribute to Wikipedia, you do that because you feel part of the Wikipedia community. And that's bond-based. And in the studies they did, so in the two studies, they manipulated bond and identity-based attachment to a group, and then checked how willing were the people to participate in that group. And they did that in two papers. So one paper was based on a movie-based site in which they created and had a condition with bond and identity-based and a control group, and they checked the contribution to the group, the attachment to the group, their post frequency, etc. And there you clearly find that compared to the control group, both bond and identity work. So basically in all the measures here, you see that bond and identity is generally higher than the control group, but you see that creating a common identity works better than creating a common bond. In the other paper, they did this by means of a Tetris game, and you either play the game as an individual or as a group against other groups, or as both an individual and part of a group. And there you also find that between, and between means identity-based, that works best, but they all work better than the control group. So this is how long people play the game. So what is quite interesting is that both ways of stimulating group participation work. So both interpersonal attachments, so liking each other, work as liking the group. But in networks of practice, so in those larger communities where you don't know each other personally, common identity works best. So it's best to stimulate a common identity. And this is kind of it's not counterintuitive, but this kind of goes against what many social media do. So many social media applications focus mostly on supporting a common bond. So you have your own profile picture, your expertise is shown, you can communicate with each other individually. And many social media applications don't necessarily focus that much on stimulating common identity. But these studies, and that's what I also think, they kind of show that if you do both, it may work better. So for example, if you're part of a group on corporate social media or part of a project team, that you get your own avatar, and not a 3D avatar, but your own group picture. So that you feel more part of the group instead of only feel part of the individual, only feel a bond with the individuals. So maybe we can do a bit more with social media, and maybe we can also try to stimulate a common identity next to stimulating common bonds, as we often do with social media. So I think that's pretty interesting from those papers, and something that is not really well incorporated into other papers. I'm going to take maybe 5 minutes of your time to wrap this up so that I am done with the lecture, and I can hand it over to Joost for next week and a week after that, which also means that this is the last time I gave the lecture. So thank you, but I'll be there for the next lecture as well, of course. So give me a couple of minutes to wrap this up. So again, basically, what I showed before, there are 3 functions of technology in virtual teams: information processing, post-production communication support. When the technology supports all of this, you reach shared understanding. So people actually being able to do the task and being able to communicate with each other and liking each other, that is shared understanding. You see that social media really ties nicely into these 3 functions of technology in virtual teams, but that they do interact. If we look specifically at knowledge sharing, you see that creating a common group, so not only supporting using the technology support team, but also thinking about, okay, how can we stimulate the social process, that you can also use social media to create an identity for a group or a common bond. So you can use social media to have people get to know each other so that they know who everyone is in the group, or you can use social media to create a group identity, so you can create a common identity in a group. Because that affects knowledge sharing, and that is also useful in those wider networks of practice, because networks of practice are usually so large that people don't know each other individually. So you would have to stimulate some kind of commonality, some kind of identity in order to have people work together. But basically, in order to stimulate knowledge sharing, you of course you have to do information processing, etc. But you also have to create a common bond or a common identity. And maybe in larger virtual teams, a common identity is more important than a common bond. And finally, stimulating social capital, so stimulating people having a large network, stimulating people liking each other either by bond or identity, and stimulating knowledge sharing. So stimulating people understanding each other, so stimulating cognitive social capital, I think also are 3 important things for virtual teams, and also are things that can really be stimulated by different aspects of social media. So that's it. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy that I'm at least reasonably in time, with skipping a few slides, but I think I discussed the most important things. So if you have additional questions, I will be free to answer it, of course. Question about the exam. So the exam is scheduled on blah, blah, blah. Would have an open book exam, which you could have the whole day. Here's what the exam is going to look like. Yeah, it turned out, so it was still a bit unclear how we would structure the exam. The exam is still open book, but it's not but it's not the whole day. So it's 2.5 hours, 3 hours, I think, or maybe, no, 2.5 hours that you have to make the exam. Because in terms of planning, there's only 1 exam week, and it was absolutely impossible to find a day in which all of you would have no exams, so you could spend the day on the exam. So we decided to do a regular exam slot of 2.5 hours, but the exam is still open book. And for me, that this exam is scheduled from 2:30 to 5 o'clock is also new. The recording of the lecture today, yes, I just had another lecture and I have other appointments today, but I'll try to do it, but it's a really busy day today. But I hopefully will do it today, or else tomorrow morning. Okay. So if you have other questions regarding the